And what I can say to you now, also maybe linking with what I've been saying earlier about Africa, is if you look at Africa, we just need to look at there are 54 countries. We are not at the same level, but there are so many opportunities. There are 54 opportunities on the continent. And the one thing that, especially if you look at, like I rightly said about the US, which is quite developed, you find that with technology, it actually works better where it's not developed, because you can be creative about coming up with innovation to be able to bridge the gap. So if you have got any innovation that you really want to test from the West, Africa is the best place to test it. And you find that it's very scalable as well, because you are not going to find many competitors who are doing the same thing.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Dr. Rufaro Mucheka, who is head of strategy and rest of Africa at Nedbank Wealth in South Africa. She has spent extensive periods with their partner Ecobank in West Africa, setting up a wealth management business. In this episode, Rufaro shines a bright light on Africa. While people often look to mature markets to see trends and developments, Rufaro shares why we should all have an eye on the innovations coming out of Africa. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Sawubona, Rufaro.
Benanjani, Kate.
So those are greetings in the Zulu language, and me saying Sawubona literally translates to I see you, you are important to me, and I value you. And what a wonderful greeting.
Yeah, in Africa, our languages are very rich, and it's not just about, good afternoon. It's very much how are you feeling? So we have to express ourselves.
And that's wonderful. And Rufaro, I've known you for what feels like many years now. So I say those words with true meaning. I do see you. You are important to me. And I so value you and everything that you've done. And I'm so honored that you're here today. We're going to be talking about opportunities all over the incredible continent of Africa. Opportunities, challenges, technology developments, financial services, diversity, inclusion. There's so much to cover. So we're really just going to dive in. And I first want to start by talking about, you were just at Africa's flagship fintech event in Rwanda. And while I always like to teach and learn about the country our guest is from, you shared a document on Rwanda's latest economic outlook that I was fascinated with. Said it was that Rwanda is the second fastest growing economy in Africa, the 5th safest country in the world to walk at night, the most improved nation in human development in the world. It has the most women in parliament at 61% and most gender-balanced cabinet in the world at 50%. Unbelievable. And this was done through a number of incredible initiatives over the last 25 years. So, Rufaro, I'd love to hear more and have you share about the panel that you were on building a financially inclusive Africa.
Kate, what an introduction. Rwanda, for those that know Rwanda very well, there was genocide in 1994. And if you look at where Rwanda is now from 94 to 2020, you are looking at about 26 years of really growth in terms of the country. I was in Rwanda actually as part of a team on a leadership journey, just to learn about Rwanda, the leadership that is done there, the companies and how they are really doing. So being at Fintechs Africa in Rwanda, coincidentally, it was also during that week, was really an opportunity for me, because as you read in that document, which was shared by the head of the Rwanda Development Board, which really promotes Rwanda, it really talks to Rwanda aspiring to become the technology hub on the continent and also becoming the financial center on the continent as well. So with that, they are creating policies to ensure that they can attract investors in Rwanda. The Fintechs Africa conference that you mentioned, it was at the Kigali Convention Center, which is quite new. And I think if you also checked in that document that you saw, you could see that Rwanda has really been aspiring for a couple of years now to become number one on the continent in terms of hosting conferences. And I think in that document, it shows they are actually now number two. So they've really worked very hard. So the convention center was just at another level. So the conference itself, it was really looking at how fintechs are really kind of influencing, especially the continent in terms of the financial sector. Because if you look at on the continent generally, we now have a lot of mobile phones, but in the rural areas, you won't be able to see banks because it's quite expensive to set up a bank branch in rural areas. So fintechs are now starting to bridge the gap. And because of that, it's starting to bring the people that were financially excluded into the financial sector, because fintechs are now working with banks. And also banks have realized that if you work with fintechs, there are so many other ways to be able to reach out to people via mobile money to actually bring them into the financial services industry. So yeah, Rwanda is a jewel of Africa, and some were even saying it's very much like a Singapore of Africa, because if you look at the population, it's not a lot, but they are really leading in terms of technology, financial services. And also I think the big one for us as a team that was in Rwanda to learn a lot about leadership was that Rwanda is looking at investing now and reaping the benefits for the future. So most of the companies that we spoke to, they are investing a lot, especially now. But when you look at their strategies, so you always have a company strategy, look at what social issue that they are solving based on the sustainable development goals, and also using technology. So technology is always at the base of all those company strategies to be able to survive into the future.
That's so great. And is that document that you shared with me something that I can share in the show notes? Because there was just so much great information in there. And I think that a lot of people like me would be surprised that Rwanda is as advanced and as important of a hub within Africa, and at the rate it's going within the world here in the next couple of years.
Yes. You can share because it was a public document that was shared with us by the country, and in terms of it's really the department that actually markets Rwanda. So I think the more the world knows about Rwanda, the more it kind of gives a snippet of what Africa can do. Because if you look at where Rwanda is coming from, it's really a very good example to say, if the country works together, which is the government and private sector and ordinary people, they can change the trajectory of the country. So, and we have a lot of other countries that are also aspiring to become the mini Rwandas into the future. So Africa is the place to invest.
That's so inspiring. And talking about being financially inclusive and technology, I know MPESA was one of the first big ones. Can you share a little more about how that platform works? And are they still the biggest player? Are other fintechs coming in and disrupting that space as well?
Fintechs are coming in, but MPESA, because it's so integrated with, especially like your revenue services, a lot of the key areas within the government are now integrated into MPESA. So you find MPESA has really taken the lead, especially in Kenya. So if you look at Kenya, let's say Kenya and Rwanda, for example, Kenya has got much, much higher population. And if I look at Zimbabwe, where I originally come from, we also have Ecocash, which is also being used. Even my mother, who never had a bank account before, now she knows how to use Ecocash. So on the continent, you find that there are mini M-Pesas in terms of other mobile money apps that are being used, but M-Pesa has really taken the lead, especially on the continent. So we can only see it growing.
And for those that aren't familiar with what M-Pesa is and what that sort of platform provides, can you give a quick overview?
On the continent, what we generally find is there has been a lot of unbanked population because we have a lot of people that live, let's say, in rural areas. And with that, what it meant was for banks to try to set up branches in rural areas, it's a very expensive exercise. So people used to keep their money under their mattresses. So fintechs came into play, and they realized that because most of the people are now starting to have smartphones, even for people like us who work in cities, I will always ensure that my mother has got a phone so that I can contact my mother. So with that, fintechs actually came on board, realized that there is a gap. There is a very large population which is unbanked, and people also work in cities and wanting to send money home. But because there are no banks and branches and everything else, one cannot be able to do that. So with that, people always say, where there is scarcity, people become creative. And I think that's why tools like MPESA have really grown and gotten traction, because people want to send money from one person to the other. And MPESA basically is mobile money. You can actually pay for your bills using your cell phone. You can send money to a neighbor or whoever, but using the cell phone. So it makes it easy for people to transact and be able to pay for services using the mobile phone without necessarily using cash.
And that's been around for quite a long time. And that's such a great example of technology coming in. And like you said, seeing that gap as an opportunity to then provide a service to help all of these people who weren't being helped by the traditional systems. And I have to share, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I guess this actually still happens, where someone here in the US, a person that I'm working with, a contractor or something, will ask for a check. And I have joked that in rural Africa, you can use your mobile phone to pay people, and you've been able to do that for years. I haven't had checks for so long. So there's even technology happening there that isn't yet available fully in even some of the most developed areas of the world.
Yeah. So what we are saying, so because the fintechs took the lead, banks have also followed suit. Because a lot of banks now, what they've done is also to create technology where bank accounts can be created via the mobile phone. So if I look at my bank, Nedbank, for example, and even Ecobank, which is our partner in a lot of African countries, we have managed to create lots of bank accounts using the mobile phone as well. So the mobile phone has really become the tool that is used mostly by people, especially in outlying areas, to be able to transact, and fewer people are now going into the banks for services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't been into the bank aside from getting a mortgage in, 15 years. Who walks into a bank anymore? So Rufaro, you are so inspiring. And before we go too far, I want to make sure that we hear about your story, how you've gotten to where you are. So take us on that journey.
Kate, I grew up in rural Zimbabwe, and when I was 25, that's when I came to South Africa, and I must say I've never looked back, because South Africa gave me a lot of opportunities to grow. So academically, I decided to pursue my master's in business administration. I became a certified financial planner, and recently I decided to do my PhD. And as I was doing my PhD, because I'm very passionate about strategy, business strategy, and not just strategy, but implementing strategy, because it's good to create a strategy. For me, what's important is the strategy working. So with that, I had to ensure that, yes, I'm passionate about strategy. So how do we make sure that I can come up with how strategy can be applied and can be made practical? So my topic was on South African companies that are expanding into the rest of Africa, because for those that are not so aware, you realize that South Africa has got a lot of companies that have been expanding their operations outside South Africa. And we have got MTN, it's very big in so many African countries. We have got retail companies like Shoprite, is in many other African countries, and even Nedbank, my company, is also in many countries on the continent. So during that time, I decided just to pursue and understand the different strategies being used. And as I was doing that, I decided to make it practical and say, Nedbank is a partner to Ecobank, and we have certain solutions that we are, especially on wealth management, which is not very mature in most of the African countries. So I decided to really write a business case to my executives to say, how can we strengthen Ecobank, especially from a wealth management perspective, because we do have the know-how. And once it was approved, I've really spent the past 3-4 years in West Africa, really helping Ecobank set up their wealth management business. As I'm speaking to you now, I'm really proud to say We now have planners in some of the key markets in Ecobank where they are doing financial planning. We engaged the regulators because it wasn't something that was regulated at that time. And the regulators are so keen because, as we all know, once we do financial planning, it basically means there's a lot of education in the market. There's a lot of, even your financial inclusion can actually increase even more because there's that awareness and especially the value that planning can add to any one of us, especially preparing them for the future. So that has really been my journey. And ever since, I speak a lot on conferences on financial inclusion, financial independence, and especially using learnings that I found in West Africa where entrepreneurship is quite big. So at times I speak at entrepreneur conferences to say, what is it that we can learn, especially in Southern Africa? Yes, we have got entrepreneurs, but I felt that in West Africa, entrepreneurship was really at a very high level. And the more we have entrepreneurs, the more we can reduce unemployment, which is, I'm not sure whether you are aware, especially on the continent, especially with technology as well. Some people are losing their jobs. So the more entrepreneurs we have, the more I think they can employ many people and reduce unemployment on the continent.
Yeah, and I so often see those entrepreneurs as innovators and the people that are looking around and seeing new gaps being created, whether it's by people losing their jobs and finding opportunities to do something new, to serve a new audience or to serve an audience in a different way. So you've mentioned Nedbank and Ecobank a few times, and I'm familiar with them, but for the audience, talk us through the history of Nedbank, its partnership with Ecobank, and how far they span throughout the African continent.
So Nedbank is the major shareholder in Ecobank, and as the partnership goes, in most of the African countries where Ecobank dominates, Ecobank is the bank that will be leading in those markets. So you find that Nedbank, we are mostly in South Africa and about 5 SADC countries. That's where we really trade as Nedbank. In the other markets, we work in partnership with Ecobank. We look for opportunities where we work together, we support each other. And with Ecobank being a Pan-African bank, it really gives us access to a very large audience. Especially in West Africa, you find that Ecobank is one of the top banks. And therefore, we really leverage off each other and see how we can work together and make a difference on the continent.
And as you mentioned, financial planning within Nedbank and Ecobank and expanding throughout the African continent. And I had the pleasure of speaking at the Nedbank Financial Planning Roadshow many years ago, so have met a lot of the super passionate financial planners that work at Nedbank. There are a lot of entrepreneurial spirits within Nedbank and with the people I've met through Ecobank, and it's so great to see that passion coming through to be able to serve more people and actually bring true financial planning to other countries. So you've been working in, correct me if I'm wrong, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda. I mean, I feel like you've been all over. What are some of the trends that you're seeing?
Kate, you have rightly said about South Africa, especially when you came to our roadshow. Our roadshow, we use it every year just to ensure that we speak to our planners, we share some trends with them. They also speak to us, especially if they've got some issues that, as a management, we can also help them with and be able to grow together. So South Africa as a market is actually a very large market in terms of financial planning, and hence we believe there's a lot of knowledge and maturity within South Africa. So going back to the other markets, what I can tell you is it's very clear, Kate, that we need to develop financial planning. We need to make people become financially independent. I was reading an article the other time that was showing the dependence ratio on the continent. And what I mean by dependence ratio is you are looking at one family member working, looking after so many people. It's either young kids or even older people. Especially in my case, my father used to work, and about 10 years ago, he went on retirement, and he didn't save enough. And on a monthly basis, we still send them money to look after themselves. So the more we spoke to our partner Ecobank around the need to sensitize people and start saving for retirement, for those moments when events happen, the more EcoBank really embraced the idea. So if you look at, let's say in Nigeria, we had some financial planners that were trained, brought them to South Africa, and we recently just changed the model so that we can offer financial planning mostly from the premier banking side, which is where they can really nurture based on the relationship that they've had with their clients. So if you just look at in those major markets that have been operating, which was Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire, we now have a full-time person who just looks after financial planning. We now have a head of financial planning in each of those markets who just only look after financial planning as well. And we now have planners. Recently, we have started working with, there's a company called Ep6, very similar to Xplan, which also offer financial, which has got an FNA tool, because all along we've been using a simple Excel spreadsheet because we did not have a simplified FNA tool, especially for those markets. So now we have started rolling out a professional tool, which is called Ep6. And we really hope that by beginning of March, the tool will be rolled out in all the markets and would have most of those planners being trained. So I must say to you, we are starting to change those markets. And in Nigeria, I think we are very aware in Nigeria, what we are doing as well is to set up a certification body like we have in South Africa, an FPI equivalent. So in South Africa, I've got a financial planning institute, which regulates the certified financial planners. And I think to the whole world, I'm not sure how many people would believe that South Africa is number 6 with about 5,000 certified planners in the world.
Yes, it's incredible.
Some of the developed markets. So Nigeria is going to be coming up. And if you look at Nigerian population, is quite huge. So very soon we'll be catching up with all those developed markets as well.
Oh, that's so great. And you mentioned an FNA tool, FNA being a financial needs analysis tool. And I'm seeing that kind of as an evolution of financial inclusion. And again, continuing to create ways where the traditionally underserved market and those that were, excluded from financial services are now being brought in, not only through technology, but you mentioned having a person, a human overseeing all of this and continuing to grow within the banks. So what I'm hearing is a lot of that combination of both human and technology and leveraging the best of both to be able to reach and serve more people.
Yes. So, Kate, if you look at, let's say in South Africa, in Nedbank, for example, our Net Group investments, which has been number 1 in terms of the asset manager locally as well as internationally. We've done that well, I think, in the past 2 years. But what I wanted to say to you is, we also have the robo, which is called Eva, which from an asset management, it can actually do a lot of very simple investments. And you find that the market in general as well is really making sure that anything that is calculated is done by the robo. So that the human side of it, we show emotions, we spend more time talking to clients, giving financial education, but ensuring that, we really touch on the emotional side of clients and change the market as you go along. So in other markets, what we also see is we now have simple tools that are on the app, especially like if I look at Nedbank, for example, on our money app, we even have functionality which says, do you want to see a financial planner? So if somebody has got our money app on their phone, they can just by merely completing all the processes on the tool, they can actually have a financial planner actually speaking to them. But some of the products that we actually have, simple products, they don't even need to speak to a person because everything's now so automated in terms of technology.
That's great. So is that just within the app, they can sort of almost on demand speak with a financial planner?
Yes, we actually have our voice and digital financial planning in South Africa, in Nedbank. In Nedbank, we have a total of about 405 financial planners at the moment, and 46 of those actually sit in our voice and digital financial planning. So it's very much more like your call center. And in that case, it means Once a client has gone onto our app, completes their information, a planner can actually call them from our voice and digital center.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we're seeing in the US is the fastest growing area for certified financial planner professionals is actually working in the call centers for, these traditionally robo-advisors, digital investment platforms, because they all realized after a few years that they do need to bring in that human element. So even the ones that started strictly as a digital only tool brought in the humans, and now they're filling those call centers not only with financial advisors and financial services professionals, but a lot of them are focusing on making sure that they have CFP professionals that have gone through the education, the ethics, the exam, the experience, and truly have that knowledge and ability to help the clients at the highest level.
Yes, you can say that again, Kate. What I did, like in November, for example, Nedbank Namibia is the second largest if you in terms of financial planning side, if you compare with Nedbank South Africa. So I was helping Nedbank Namibia because they do have a couple of financial advisors there as well. And one thing that they asked me to bring when I went to Namibia was, what do your top financial advisors do for them to do well? And I did a mini survey before I went to Namibia. In that survey of our top 25 advisors showed that most of the advisors, what they do, they don't spend time doing calculations and everything else, because if you look at, we've got tools that can do that accurately, but they spend time servicing their clients, listening to their clients, and ensuring that their clients feel that they are getting value. And the other thing that we've also started doing was, if you look at our top advisors, they are saying, you know what, if I can start advising from a generational perspective, where they're advising, let's say, a grandfather and maybe the parents and maybe the grandkids, it really shows that they're adding value, because the whole family is now relying on such planners. And we are starting to see more and more of our planners really just focusing on making sure that the advice that they give, they make sure that the clients are at the center of what they do. And they don't have to worry so much about trying to become fund managers, but knowing that they are humans and they need to connect with their clients.
So great, Rufaro. So Rufaro, one of the things you speak on that is also a big passion of mine that I want to touch on is women empowerment. So talk us through what you're seeing across the African continent, some of the speaking engagements you've been at.
Yeah, so Kate, I think as someone who was born and grew up in rural areas, one thing that I've learned over time, which I think as I was growing up, I thought I was ashamed of it because I wasn't educated, it was embarrassing. But I think the more I've experienced a lot of cultures on the continent and traveled a lot, the more I've realized that women, we play a very big role in the development of the country. Because if you look at when a child is born, especially in Africa, the caregivers, the first caregivers are normally women. It's either the mother or the grandmother or the sister to the mother, whoever it is, but it's basically women. So one thing that I've also learned is, if women are educated, not educated to get a PhD, but educated maybe up to grade 7, it also means they understand what happens in the country. They can be able to choose the right nutrition. They are the ones that choose even the school where the child goes, what the child eats, and anything around the child, even the language that they teach the child, because they are the first caregivers. So one thing that I speak a lot about women is to say, let's find a way of making sure that women, at least they are educated, even if it means up to grade 7, because they can make the right choices for the children, and they can actually improve the awareness and also even understanding the value of money, because they are a bit more educated. What I can tell you, we're chatting a little bit about Rwanda now. When we went to Rwanda, one thing that I was quite impressed with was the government tends to be very involved in uplifting certain communities. So we went to visit what is called a model village, where I think from our understanding, I think that those families were living in an area which was usually flooded. And the government decided to take all those families and build what they called a model village. And by the way, it was built in 6 months. So it was a school, primary and high school, and a model village, which is really a block of flats. And what the government also does is invest in projects, like there was a greenhouse where they were farming some chilies, and they also had chickens which lay eggs. And apparently they actually get, I think it's about 7,500 eggs per day, and they already have a value chain for their eggs. The one thing that I was quite impressed with was because those projects are specifically for that village. So any family member who belongs to that village, who has got children that are 5 years and below, they get 2 eggs per child per day. So in that case, which means it's also adding to nutrition for those children. So for me, it really links back to what I've been saying around, if you have a woman who is aware, who is at least like, we just uplift their education a bit, they can make the right decisions. And there's also have been research, Kate, which shows that women are better savers. And if you look at on the continent, there are so many households that are led by women because men go into town or to mines to go look for jobs. So which means when it comes to decisions around money on monthly basis, they are made by women. And normally women, they want their children to be educated. So you can imagine if we empower such people with the knowledge of what to do with their money, they can make they will make sure that they save, they make sure that their children will go to good schools, and they can even be able to fund their own small projects because generally they are also very innovative and creative to be able to sustain the families.
Very innovative and creative. No, and it's so good to hear about projects like that are not only getting out there and trying to help, but really making an impact. And I love those little details of making sure that each child gets 2 eggs a day, which does so much, from nutrition to just teaching lessons about how to run a business, how to grow things. That's so wonderful. So Rufaro, I also want to touch on financial independence and what you're seeing in terms of trends for, you mentioned before, dependence. And so this is kind of the other side of that, of getting to that financial independence. Talk us through some of what you're seeing there.
Yeah, Kate, the one thing that I find which we still have a long way to go is to create that financial independence. We still see a lot of people that consume everything that they earn within the month. So there isn't any spare money that is put aside to be able to invest. When I was in Ghana, for example, I was working there with a colleague, Paul Mante. He's now the head of the asset management business in Ecobank in Ghana. And ever since he became very aware of financial planning, he was anywhere on his path of making sure that whatever opportunity that he had, he would teach people about financial independence. So we used to go to churches. So he was so well known as a pastor. He also would go to churches where we talk about the importance of making sure that you don't live from month to month. You need to live within your means. And what it meant living within the means, it wasn't about making sure that you finish all your salary, but it's about just focus on what you need, and you need to be able to invest the rest. So from a broader perspective, there's so much education that is being done on Africa. So the one thing that we are doing a lot in South Africa at the moment, especially if I can talk for Nedbank and generally the financial services industry, you find that in South Africa, one thing that really helps a lot in creating the financial independence, it's also because we know that from a regulation perspective, we do have tax-free savings accounts, which were introduced a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of education that we are doing to people to say, if you can be able to utilize the tax-free savings accounts, it basically means you can start saving now and you pack your money aside. And even when you get into retirement, you get access to that money without even paying tax. If you also look at the structure of the retirement annuities as well in South Africa, they are structured in such a way that you don't have to pay upfront tax, which means whatever you have contributed for tax, once one does their tax returns, you know that you are going to get all the tax back. And if one can plow more and more of that money into retirement annuities, which means you are only going to pay tax once you get to retire. So there's a lot of education that we are doing a lot in terms of making sure that people understand the value of money and the value of saving. On a personal note, what I do as well is I'm actually in partnership with the government, where there is a magazine that is called Public Services Manager. They've got a slot which we call Financial Fitness. They give me a topic every single month. And I write a lot about simple things like budgeting. Why is it important? Where can you cut? And we write a lot about, the last time it was about tax-free savings. At some point I did a topic about saving for a holiday. So I try to find opportunities, Kate, to write messages, to talk at conferences or any other opportunities to ensure that there is awareness in terms of what people can do to be able to be financially independent.
That's great. And we're talking a lot about financial independence, financial education, and there's also this huge focus on financial literacy. I would say everywhere in the world, but I know South Africa has some of the leading initiatives and working with the government on expanding financial literacy. There are financial advisors and planners all over the country that go out through all sorts of means, going into churches, speaking publicly, meeting one-on-one with the public who, still are underserved and are probably not going to be able to afford to work with a planner or aren't going to necessarily understand what they're even looking at in terms of a financial planning technology tool. So what are you seeing throughout the rest of Africa when it comes to financial literacy? Is there anything in terms of financial education, financial literacy that's being taught in schools, or is that still coming through NGOs and companies like Nedbank and Ecobank getting out there like you are, Rufaro, and helping to spread that message to the public?
What I have seen, Kate, is a lot of banks on the continent have taken that responsibility head on in terms of knowing that we are the experts when it comes to financial planning and financial services, and we need to find a way of helping people understand. If I look at that conference that you spoke about in Rwanda, the Fintechs Africa conference, I was on a panel with some leading players in Rwanda, and they were talking a lot about what they are doing in terms of financial inclusion, because our topic was financial inclusion in Africa. And so it really gave me the pleasure to know that banks, financial institutions, they've seen the responsibility of finding a way of sharing that information. And now also with the tools that I've commented, especially now that most of the banks would have the apps, they also share a lot of information on the apps. There is a lot that is spoken, especially on TV, like in South Africa, we do that a lot. We find slots where we can speak on TV, and I've been on radio a couple of times, and I even wrote another article now, which is going to go into some magazines. So you find people, there are individuals, there are institutions, and at times even the regulators as well, they are really focusing on how can we make sure that we include everyone, especially on the continent, in terms of finances and understanding and being able to save for the future.
It's so important to make sure that we're reaching everyone, no matter what the service model is, or if it's pro bono. And it sounds like there's a lot of pro bono work going on, which is important in every profession, and especially in financial services. And Rufaro, I know you work in a bank, but with your experience in different countries throughout the continent, are there independent advisors popping up in other countries, or is it still mostly through the banking system?
There are a lot of financial advisors that are popping up. Some of it might not be as regulated as in mature markets, but there will always be people that give advice. The other thing that I find a lot on the continent as well is you've got a lot of international banks that tend to service the private clients who might want to invest offshore. And so they fly in. Some people call them maybe briefcase, advisors, but they do fly in, offer specialized advice. But yes, we do have independent brokers, but you find that some of the markets are not as mature. But yes, so you find there will be banks. There are some international players. we do have some independent, but what we also find is a lot of these informal sectors, where people, let's say maybe me and maybe 10 friends, we save money together. Maybe we put money in a pot, and then we say this month maybe it's Rufaro is going to get it. Next month maybe it's Kate is going to get it, because maybe Kate, maybe she wants to buy, the beautiful couches that she found somewhere, but people actually contribute. So there are so many other ways that are being used on the continent as a way of saving. Some have got some burial societies, but that one is mainly if, let's say, somebody passes on. So there are so many other creative ways depending on what the objective is. We might not necessarily call it financial planning, but it creates platform for people to talk about money and to maybe even educate each other about money and about saving as well.
So Rufaro, with all of the incredible innovation going on all throughout Africa, what would you tell advisors and planners around the world that probably don't think of Africa as being such a central hub of innovation? And one of the reasons I created the Innovating Advice Show is to share stories exactly like this. I know how often people look to the US, the UK, Australia, Japan, the places with the most developed financial planning markets. And South Africa, as you mentioned, is an incredible one with almost 5,000 CFP professionals, the sixth largest population of CFP professionals in the world, hugely passionate, wonderful people down there. And thinking beyond South Africa to throughout the continent, what advice would you give to those who wouldn't otherwise think of Africa as being a place to look to for what the future of financial services could be?
Kate, in 2019, I was in the UK where I did a presentation at Invest Africa conference. And from there, I went to Jersey. And in Jersey, there was really a client event just talking about Africa. And for those that know Jersey, that's where, there's a lot of money that is sitting in Jersey. And so we had a keynote speaker, my colleague who works in Nigeria, and then we had a panel discussion with most of the industry players in terms of the financial services in Jersey, where we're talking about why Africa, and which was hosted by Jersey Finance. And what I can say to you now, also maybe linking with what I've been saying earlier about Africa, is if you look at Africa, we just need to look at there are 54 countries. We are not at the same level, but there are so many opportunities. There are 54 opportunities on the continent. And the one thing that, especially if you look at, like I rightly said about the US, which is quite developed, you find that with technology, it actually works better where it's not developed, because you can be creative about coming up with innovation to be able to bridge the gap. So if you have got any innovation that you really want to test from the West, Africa is the best place to test it. And you find that it's very scalable as well, because you're not going to find many competitors who are doing the same thing. And the other thing also is, the other point that I just wanted to comment about Africa as well is an example that we saw in Rwanda, which was quite interesting, because there is a company that deals with the drones. And apparently it's a US-based company. And I think in the US, they couldn't test those drones because of, I think, regulation. And they came to Rwanda and they spoke to the president to say, we just want to test our technology. And they were given a platform to do that. And what I can tell you, the company is called the Zipline. I think maybe you even saw it in the document that I sent you. Anybody can actually Google Zipline. And the story is, they came to Africa, tested their technology, and they are making a difference on the continent in terms of being able to deliver medicines and medical supplies to areas where it used to take 6 hours to deliver. Now it's only 45 minutes. And that technology is now being used even in other countries like Ghana. They've now gone to Ghana. They've also, they are even exploring other European markets with that technology. So Africa is the best place to test technology. And, as long as it's solving a social issue, I must say Africa is open to do business.
Yes, Rufaro, preach. I love it. So, Dr. Rufaro Mucheka, I strongly suggest that all listeners follow you on social media. I love seeing where you're at, what you're doing, what you're speaking about. So, where can they find you specifically on LinkedIn?
On LinkedIn, you just use Rufaro Mucheka and you'll be able to find me there. So yeah, if they search Dr. Rufaro Mucheka, they'll find me. And I continue to write my stories. And thank you again, Kate, for giving me such a platform to be able to talk about my story.
Well, and I imagine I will definitely have to have you on as innovations continue in Africa, as everything there continues to inspire what's happening in other places around the world that many people might not even be aware of. And I'll make sure to link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can easily find you there. And I can't let you go without first asking, what is your favorite food and drink from your beautiful country there in South Africa?
Kate, what I can say to you is, there are so many palates in South Africa. You know that in South Africa, we have got 11 official languages, and each language comes with some form of culture. So there are so many different types of foods, which, I can lose count in terms of what I like. But I must say, lately, my palates are very much on biryani. Biryani is a very Indian-inspired food, which I love a lot.
Wonderful. And pair that with a nice Chenin Blanc.
Yes, please. Yes, definitely. Yeah, no, I love my chicken. I love the chicken biryani with my Chenin Blanc.
Excellent. Well, Rufaro, I look forward to seeing you again in person and enjoying a biryani and Chenin Blanc with you. Thank you so much for being with me today.
You are welcome. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I would love to hear from you directly about what resonated, what didn't, and what you'd like to hear in future episodes. You can connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram at Innovating Advice, or hop on over to innovatingadvice.com. Till next time.